The sun rises over the Halifax Regional Municipality. It is August, the dog days of a much-anticipated summer. The grass is finally green, and Haligonians again mark their territory on patios across the city. But this new season isn't the only change afoot. Already underway is a larger transformation in the way that Haligonians create their habitat. In some cases, these changes are invisible, but in others, the landscape leaves evidence of its change, etched into a new urban form. An unprecedented and sustained migratory expansion has been a driving force behind growing levels of competition for living space. These changes have brought both prosperity and hardship. It is becoming more and more difficult for inhabitants to afford housing. What's more, even for those that can afford it, it has become harder and harder just to find a place to live. The inhabitants of this city have the power to shape their landscape, to guide the winds of change in their desired direction. But different visions for housing compete for airtime. Across the city, Haligonians face uncertainty. Will they experience hardship or prosperity? In the thick of the central city, one Haligonian must embark on a search for a new home. This bachelor was recently informed that their home, a basement apartment, was sold and they must move. And swiftly, they are confronted with the harsh reality of the rental market. Few options in their neighborhood meet their needs and budget, and those that do are swarmed by droves of the unhoused and ravenous. Now, they face a crucial decision. Will they widen the territory of their search to meet their budget? This will distance them from social supports, lengthen their commute to work, and perhaps force them into automobile ownership. Their search informs them that this city considers a one-bedroom apartment a luxury which they cannot afford. In the end, they find a room with a housemate in a neighborhood just beyond the territory of their previous home. The change is not drastic, but it is undesired. The same competition that created this desperation has also enabled some landlords to benefit greatly. And in this habitat, they are an essential part of the housing system. And speaking of cohabitation, this pair of Haligonians has been cohabitating for the past few years and is looking to secure more permanent housing. The two must brace themselves for a market landscape that may be ruthless and punishing, but if successful, rewarding beyond measure. The market is hot, a desirable place to live. Many other young pairs are also eyeing the habitat as a place to settle down. To stay on top of the competition, this pair's budget must be flexible, which may stretch their resources beyond their means. They wait and watch carefully, and when the moment and home is right, they strike. Success! What's more, their new home has come with a built-in self-generation mechanism. Below the primary dwelling is a basement rental that can be used to help chip away at their mortgage. But, due to the increased property tax they will now have to pay in comparison to the previous owners, they will increase the rental rate to a point that the current tenant can no longer afford. But this is no skin off their hide. It'll be no trouble to find a new, reliable tenant in this hot housing market. In the end, they had to stretch their budget to outpounce their competition, but they hope that in the future, this choice will lead to prosperity. For now, they have gained housing security and they have found a place to hunker down and invest. And there's this pair. After decades of punctual mortgage payments and the stability of a safe nest, they are now looking to transition to a smaller home. In the current competitive state of this ecosystem, their empty nest has no shortage of suitors. With an endless stream of eager potential buyers, the contenders must outbid each other, with the highest amount coming out the victor. They are set to receive a hefty return on their home, which may be a product of a hot market, but in the end, was only made possible after those decades of punctual mortgage payments. With this return, they have enough capital to purchase a smaller home and to add a financial buffer for their retirement. These symbiotic relationships between renter and landlord, buyers and sellers, must exist within the housing ecosystem. But for every fortune that is made within the system, there must be others who transfer their wealth. For Haligonians, shelter is a need, and they will find a way to house themselves, whether or not they are paying too much. Fortunately for the colony, there's a team of Haligonians devoted to addressing the pressing needs in their habitat. Thus far, Their strategy for bringing housing harmony has been to ease pressure on the housing supply by adapting their rules to allow for higher and higher nests in strategic locations near critical resources. This strategy has been limited in its capacity to combat the true heart of the challenge. Ultimately, Haligonians must rely on private interests to construct housing. This has led to some troubling contradictions. On one hand, much needed housing is built, but on the other, these new homes are often priced above local affordability and fail to provide security for those that were already there. To address this, leaders in Halifax have implemented policies to encourage that a small percentage of units within new developments will be affordable. But if it's considered an achievement to include just a minor fraction of new units as affordable, then something, somewhere, has gone astray. These strategies have required great collaboration and perseverance, and every affordable home that has been added to the city has improved someone's life. These isolated efforts help, but they're not the systemic overhaul needed to provide affordable, safe housing to the entire population. To chart a new course, Halifax must be willing to challenge conventional housing policies. First and foremost, housing is a human right, but currently, the priority is to ensure that it remains a reliable investment. It is time to make affordability the priority. This will require a wider, shared vision for how housing could be done differently. This shared vision will have its own challenges. How will it be paid for? What will have to be given up to make it happen? There will always be trade-offs. For every dollar the government spends on housing, it could be spent on infrastructure, healthcare, or other social supports. Perhaps no true consensus will ever be found. But there is one thing we can all agree on, that everybody should have housing. To chart a new course, Halifax must collectively decide that it's willing to invest and to invoke system-wide change. But don't just take our word for it. Two recent reports, both created by experts and key stakeholders, also call for a shift in the way we create housing. Published by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the report, Keys to a Housing Secure Future for All Nova Scotians, cites the four main causes for homelessness and housing unaffordability in Nova Scotia as the disinvestment in government-subsidized non-market housing, the increasing financialization of housing, gaps in the social safety net for income support and low minimum wages, the housing crisis impacting some populations severely. This plan aims to address the root causes of our housing challenges through increased government investment in social services and subsidized non-market housing. This reflects a sentiment that the private housing market isn't sufficient on its own to provide secure housing for all Nova Scotians. We need both the private market and significant public investments. The second report, put together by the Nova Scotia Affordable Housing Commission, titled Charting a New Course for Affordable Housing in Nova Scotia, stresses that there is no one silver bullet solution to improving our housing situation, but rather a great need for collaboration towards a common vision for housing in this province. The report makes a similar call to action for significant change in the ways provincial and municipal governments invest in, regulate, and protect housing. The fact that both these reports were published in May 2021 highlights the urgency of this matter. Experts have stated this is a crisis, and it demands immediate attention and action. We recommend reading both these reports if you're interested in the finer details of how housing could be done differently. Halifax is in flux. A changing housing landscape has brought both hardship and fortune. But the good news is that change is still happening, and we still have an opportunity to create an equitable future.